Sir, the interpreter fell ill unexpectedly. They said they won't be able to come. Madison Clark's voice rang out, firm yet unnervingly calm. The conference room on the 45th floor of Global Trust froze. This was no ordinary company. Global Trust was one of the largest financial and investment conglomerates in Manhattan, managing dozens of funds and massive assets for hundreds of international enterprises. This headquarters, where billion-dollar deals were signed, had long been regarded as the powerhouse of Wall Street. Just one decision here could shake the entire market. And now, their whole career stood on the verge of collapse because of one unforeseen absence. Richard Campbell, CEO of Global Trust, stood in stunned silence. His phone slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against the wooden table. He yanked at his tie, his breath ragged, sweat forming on his forehead. His eyes locked on the clock. The Hansol Group delegation had already arrived in the lobby. In only 10 minutes, they would walk in. 10 minutes, Richard muttered, then nearly shouted, "My God! We are going to lose this deal. Hundreds of millions of dollars will vanish just because of one interpreter." The room erupted in chaos. Assistants dashed off. Junior directors frantically flipped through contacts, calling everywhere. Someone stammered a suggestion to use a translation app, only to be immediately shut down. "Are you insane? Koreans listening to an app? That's suicide." Madison stood tall, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a blade. She tilted her head, her voice low but cutting through the frantic air. "I've tried every contact already. No one can make it in time. At least not within the next 10 minutes. A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard collapsed into the leather chair, his empty gaze fixed on the glass wall. Manhattan still gleamed. Traffic still roared below. But inside this lavish boardroom, one of America's leading financial empires was on the brink of losing everything, simply because of the absence of one interpreter. While the assistants were still arguing, the conference room door creaked open. The sound of the hinge echoed faintly. Out of place in the tense atmosphere, a small figure appeared at the doorway. Olivia Johnson. She still wore the familiar blue uniform of the janitorial team, hands pushing a cleaning cart from the hallway. Her soft shoes made quiet steps on the carpet, completely foreign to the cold, commanding space of this power room. Olivia paused briefly. She had heard the panicked words just now. Lost interpreter. Deal collapsing. Hundreds of millions vanishing. Each phrase pounded in her ears like hammer blows, making her heart race. For a few seconds, Olivia hesitated. Then, as if an invisible thread pulled her forward, she drew a deep breath, summoning all her courage. "Excuse me." Her voice trembled slightly but was clear. "I can help. I can speak Korean." The whole room froze. Faces that had been in turmoil all turned toward the door. Bewildered eyes, a few faint chuckles, as if someone had just cracked an ill-timed joke. Campbell furrowed his brow, scanning Olivia from head to toe, then growled, "You can speak Korean." Olivia straightened, her eyes bright even as her chest tightened. She nodded, her voice firm, each word deliberate. "Yes, let me try. There is no more time." A heavy silence weighed down the room. Then, from the corner of the table, a light laugh escaped. Madison Clark tilted her head, a thin smile curling on her lips. She glanced at the CEO and spoke in a tone both mocking and sweet, yet icy. "Richard, are you really about to entrust the company's fate to a black janitor? Koreans take ritual and hierarchy extremely seriously. If they find out the truth, they'll think we are insulting them." The words cut straight into Olivia's chest, like a blade. She clenched her hand, nails digging into her palm, her eyes shimmering, but Olivia refused to shed tears. She lifted her chin, her voice calm yet unwavering. "In that case, introduce me as an Asian client relations specialist. I will handle the rest." Campbell glanced at the clock, the second hand ticking forward like relentless pressure. There was no time left for arguments. He exhaled, his eyes still doubtful, but nodded. "All right, no other choice. Go get ready." Olivia inhaled deeply. She knew this moment was the threshold of destiny. Once she stepped through it, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The small lounge next to the lobby on the ground floor suddenly became the place where Olivia had to change her entire life within minutes. The sweat-soaked blue uniform was folded neatly into a plastic bag, giving way to a plain office dress she had hastily borrowed from a receptionist colleague. The dress was not perfect, a bit loose at the shoulders, a bit too long past the knees, but at least it allowed her to blend in with the office staff, preparing to welcome the company's biggest partner in history. In front of the mirror, Olivia's trembling hands gathered her curly hair up high, pinning it with a worn plastic clip. The yellow light revealed a face both tense and resolute. In her hands, she carried only a small notebook and a ballpoint pen, like the only shield she could bring into that room of power. When Olivia stepped into the hallway, Richard Campbell was waiting. His eyes swept over her from head to toe, still heavy with doubt. His voice was low, each word ground out. "You only translate. Absolutely no commenting on your own. Understood." Olivia gave a slight nod. She knew this was not trust, but merely a desperate gamble. Yet even so, her eyes held a quiet pride. Nearby, Madison stood with arms crossed against the wall, her gaze cutting across Olivia like a blade. Her red lips curved slightly, her voice low but sharp enough for everyone to hear. Even if Cole puts on an office dress, Cole is still Cole. Cole cannot become a gem. The space froze once more. A few assistants cast sidelong glances at Olivia, pity flickering in their eyes, but she did not answer. She only closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, letting the blood in her veins settle, letting her heart stop trembling. When she opened her eyes, Olivia was ready to step into the battle she had never imagined would come in her life. The heavy wooden door swung open. The Hansol Group delegation entered, each step steady, rows of dark suits, straight and stern gazes fixed. The secretaries behind them bowed slightly as they placed documents and water on the table. Every movement is precise, like a ritual. On the Global Trust side, everyone was already seated. Richard Campbell at the center, Madison Clark to his right, several senior directors along the long table. At the far end, Olivia sat upright, notebook and pen placed before her, her hand still clasped lightly to steady the tremor within. Campbell rose, offering a diplomatic smile, extending his hand toward the partners. "Welcome, Mr. Park Ji-hoon and colleagues. Allow me to introduce Olivia Johnson, our Asian client relations specialist." The eyes of the Hansol delegation turned toward Olivia. She stood, bowed, and spoke in flawless Korean, her voice clear and resonant across the room. "Honorable gentlemen, it is my great privilege to be part of today's meeting. I hope this encounter will bring benefit and lasting cooperation for both sides." A flicker of surprise crossed the face of Mr. Park Ji-hoon, the head of the Hansol delegation. He studied Olivia more closely, then slowly gave a slight nod, a small gesture, yet enough to ease the tension in the room. Campbell exhaled quietly, his shoulders loosening. Olivia returned to her seat, her hands resting neatly on the table. In just a few short minutes, from an invisible janitor in the hallway, she had become the sole bridge of language between two worlds, facing each other across this long wooden table. The meeting began. Richard Campbell spoke first, his voice calm but rigid, reading each figure in the proposal. Olivia listened, pen ready in her hand, then translated into Korean with a clear voice and steady rhythm. Not a word wasted, not a beat stumbled. Immediately, the Hansol delegation nodded, exchanging looks of agreement with one another. Olivia did more than transfer language. She wove in subtle cultural nuances she had learned, bowing deeper when mentioning long-term cooperation, using formal honorifics when speaking of mutual respect. The atmosphere, once heavy, gradually softened. When a Hansol director made a humorous remark about the American market always being too hasty, Olivia smiled, quick-wittedly adding a familiar Korean proverb, "The fast walker never notices the mountain change." The entire Hansol delegation burst into laughter. The sound of laughter echoed through the grand boardroom, shattering the thin ice that had lingered over it. Richard Campbell glanced sideways, catching Olivia sitting upright, her eyes alight with confidence. For the first time, the habitual severity in his gaze gave way to a flicker of surprise mixed with admiration. Along the table, a few directors bent their heads, whispering to each other, their voices tinged with disbelief. She is doing really well. Olivia continued translating, word by word, sentence by sentence. But inside, her heart pounded rapidly. Her hand gripped the notebook lightly to steady herself, while within her rose a strange, new feeling. For the first time in her life, in this luxurious room, Olivia no longer felt like a shadow. She felt she truly belonged here. The meeting had gone on for nearly an hour. The tension that had filled the room at the beginning had now eased. Global Trust's proposal was being discussed in detail, and Olivia continued interpreting with smooth, confident fluency every phrase, every expression she chose. Not only made the Hansel delegation understand, but feel respected. Campbell sat still, and for the first time that morning, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. A deal seemed almost within reach. Then, a strange silence spread. Mr. Park Ji-hoon, head of the Hansel delegation, had just received a message on his phone. He read it quietly, his usually composed eyes suddenly dimming. Darkening, no one noticed, except the vice chairman beside him, who also frowned as he caught a glimpse of the screen. They exchanged a brief look, then placed the phone face down on the table. The air grew unnaturally heavy, as though the very atmosphere thickened. Mr. Park slowly lifted his gaze, his sharp eyes shifting from Campbell to Olivia, lingering on her longer. Then he spoke in English, each word pronounced clearly but coldly, striking down on the table like the blow of a knife. "Excuse me, but who exactly are you?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to Olivia. Everyone knew Hansel lacked English speakers, but for critical negotiations, they always demanded an official interpreter. Not because of language barriers, but because it was their way of keeping balance, letting their mother tongue sound equal to English in the room. It was part national pride, part unbreakable diplomatic ritual. Olivia jolted. The question pierced straight through the fragile shell of confidence she had built for the past hour. Her heart raced, her hands clenched under the table. Campbell frowned, forcing composure. "Mr. Park, as I introduced earlier, this is our Asian client relations specialist, Olivia Johnson. Is there a problem?" Mr. Park tilted his head slightly, his deep eyes locking on Olivia. "Client relations specialist. Strange, because the file we have does not say so. On the contrary, it suggests her position is very different." In an instant, Global Trust's directors whispered restlessly, eyes darting toward Olivia. From the side row, Madison's eyes lit up. Though her face feigned shock, her hand lightly covering her mouth, as if she too was stunned by the question. Richard Campbell cleared his throat, but the usual firmness in his voice was gone. "Perhaps there has been some mistake." Mr. Park did not take his eyes off Olivia. "Then, you yourself, tell us. Olivia Johnson, who are you truly in this company?" Every gaze bore down on her. The spacious, high-ceilinged room suddenly shrank into a narrow box where every exit was sealed. Olivia felt her chest tighten, her breath grow short. What should she say? 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. Half urged her to cling to Campbell's introduction. The other half, faint yet unyielding, demanded she tell the truth. Her lips dry, Olivia swallowed. She raised her head, struggling to keep her eyes steady, her voice trembling but clear. "I am indeed Olivia Johnson, and my official job at Global Trust is janitor." The words cracked like thunder in the closed room. Every look changed instantly. Campbell's eyes bulged, his face flushed as if struck. The directors murmured, some leaning back in disbelief. No one spoke, but contempt and disappointment were etched clearly across their faces. Mr. Park remained silent for several seconds, then slowly rose. His chair scraped the carpet with a chilling sound. His voice was not loud, but each word landed heavy as lead. "In our culture, deception about one's title is an insult beyond acceptance. You introduced a janitor as a specialist and considered it normal. To Hansel, this is an affront." He gave a shallow bow, but the coldness in the gesture weighed more than any rebuke. The Hansel members all stood, gathering documents, arranging pens neatly. The sound of their leather shoes striking the floor echoed evenly. Coldly, Richard Campbell leapt up, reaching out desperately. "Mr. Park, please wait." This is just a misunderstanding. But Mr. Park had already turned away. This meeting ends here. The Hansol delegation walked out without a backward glance. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving a heavy void. Richard Campbell stood frozen, his hand still hovering in the air before dropping helplessly. His face turned ashen. The directors exchanged looks, none daring to speak. Olivia sat still, her hand resting on the notebook. The words on the page blurred beneath silent tears. Every sentence she had just translated seemed to vanish, leaving only one bare truth. She would never be allowed to belong in this room. At the corner of the table, Madison Clark tilted slightly, her hand covering her mouth, as though to stifle shock. But at the edge of her lips, a faint curve appeared, a triumphant smile only she knew. That afternoon, the air at Global Trust hung heavy, like storm clouds, suspended over the glass ceiling. A few hours after the Hansol delegation had left, Richard Campbell summoned Olivia into his office. He did not sit. He stood behind the desk, arms tightly crossed, eyes cold. Olivia Johnson. His voice was low and hoarse, straining to contain his anger. You may have had good intentions, but the damage you caused is too great. Hansol sees this as an insult. I have no choice. For now, you are suspended until further notice. You are not allowed to set foot in this office again. Olivia froze. Not a word of defense. Not a single tear fell at that moment. She only bowed her head, trembling hands holding the suspension notice, then quietly left. The hallway stretched endlessly. In her arms, she carried a cardboard box with a few belongings, an old notebook, a pen, and a ceramic mug printed with the words, "Dream Big," once bought at a Goodwill store for less than $1. For Olivia, it was a reminder of hope that one day, dreams could come true. Colleagues avoided her eyes as she walked past. A few whispered in pity, but none approached. Olivia stepped out of the glittering glass tower, feeling small, adrift in the hurried crowd of Manhattan. The sky was gray with dusk. The wind lashed her face, but it did not sting as much as the ache inside. Only that morning, she had sat in the most powerful room on Wall Street, translating fluently, seeing the Korean smile and catching the admiring glimmer in Campbell's eyes. For the first time, Olivia had felt a true career door crack open before her, and that very same day, the door slammed shut, casting her down to the very bottom. The hope that had just flickered was now ashes. When she returned to the small apartment in Brooklyn, Olivia sat motionless on the worn chair, the box on her lap. In the next room, her mother had already fallen asleep, while her younger brother studied, his head still bent over his books, dreaming of college, of a brighter future. Olivia bit her lip hard. Her brother needed to keep studying, needed tuition, and she was the only one to bear the burden. A soft knock at the door. Olivia was startled. Who would come at this hour? When she opened it, no neighbor appeared, but a familiar figure stood there. James Whitaker, a board member, a man in his 60s, silver-haired, stern-faced, yet his eyes were gentle. "Mr. Whitaker," Olivia exclaimed. James nodded, his voice deep and warm. "I apologize for coming unannounced, but I want to hear the story from you. May I come in?" Olivia nodded slightly, inviting him into the living room. The small space, with simple furniture and a worn sofa, was tidy nonetheless. James sat down, quietly observing. "You know," he began, "I sat in the meeting today. I saw you work, and I saw the Hansol delegation listen. Everything was smooth until they suddenly changed their attitude. Too quickly, too strangely. I do not believe the truth is as simple as people say." Olivia's chest tightened. His words were like a spark, breaking the shell of silence. She burst into tears, then told everything. She had studied Korean at UCLA, dreaming of becoming a professional interpreter. Her father had died suddenly in an accident when she was only in her 3rd year. Her mother developed severe diabetes, requiring long-term treatment. Her younger brother was still in school, unable to fend for himself. Olivia dropped out. Returning to New York, she did anything she could. Waiting tables, night shifts, and finally janitorial work at Global Trust. Without a degree, and as a black woman, every career door slammed shut. But at least, the job allowed her to support her family, to keep her brother in school. "Tears streaming," Olivia whispered. For all these years, all I have done is mop floors, empty trash. But this morning, when I sat in that room, when I spoke the language I love, I felt a part of my true self come alive again. I believed, maybe, just maybe, my career path was not over. But then, her voice broke, her shoulders trembling. It all collapsed. Faster than it began. James stayed silent, his eyes shining with profound compassion. He placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder, his voice steady. Olivia, you did nothing wrong. The fault lies with those who turned you into a scapegoat. Hansol would never shift their stance so abruptly unless another hand was involved. I believe someone wanted to bring you down, and perhaps bring down the company as well. I will find out. Olivia looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. In her despair, his words were like a candle lit in the darkness. James nodded softly. Hold on to your faith. This is not the end. In the small Brooklyn apartment, in the quiet of the night, Olivia still wept. But this time, her tears were not only sorrow. Somewhere deep inside, a fragile spark of hope had flickered to life again. The next morning, James Whittaker sat silently in his office on the 38th floor. He could not dismiss what had happened. A negotiation of that magnitude could not collapse because of a minor mistake. Someone had pulled the strings. He opened a drawer, pulling out an old address book, flipping to a handwritten name. Kim Min-soo, a Hansol executive. James had met at a financial conference in Zurich. If anyone would listen to him, it was Kim. James picked up the phone, dialing the number. After several rings, the familiar deep voice answered. Mr. Whittaker, it has been a long time. James went straight to the point. Mr. Kim, forgive me for calling unexpectedly, but I need to know what caused Hansol to change its stance so suddenly. This is not your usual style. If possible, please help me convey apologies to Mr. Park and request another meeting. There was hesitation on the other end. Then Kim sighed. We received an anonymous email. It contained Johnson's personnel file listing her title as janitor. Mr. Park considered it an insult. I will send you a copy. But please understand, Mr. Park is furious. I cannot promise more. The call ended. James leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping the desk. An anonymous email, just as he suspected. That afternoon, his personal inbox received the copy. James opened it. Cold words sprawled across the screen. This is the person you are trusting. Below was Olivia's file, with the title Janitor. James immediately called the head of IT, instructing, trace the source. Everything must remain absolutely confidential. Lines of code streamed across the screen. Layers of security peeled back one by one. Finally, a report lay on James's desk. The email had not come from outside, but had been sent directly from the company's own system. The IP address originated from Madison Clark's computer. James frowned. The pieces were falling into place, but he needed more to expose the truth before the board of directors. Keep digging, he ordered. 2 days later, another stack of documents landed on his desk. A draft contract Madison had once pushed aggressively to sign. James read every clause carefully. The deeper he read, the tighter his brow furrowed. Unfavorable terms, high risks, and nearly a trap were laid for global trust. That evening, James carried the papers to the small apartment in Brooklyn. Olivia opened the door, startled to see him. In the cramped living room, he placed the folder on the table, watching her closely. Olivia, I have investigated, and I discovered things out of the ordinary. The email smearing you did not come from outside. It came from within, from Madison Clark's computer. Olivia froze. She opened the folder, flipping through the contract pages quickly. Her eyes shifted from confusion to fury. She did all this just to eliminate me. James nodded slightly. Not only you. I believe there is a larger scheme, and Madison is not acting from personal spite alone. This is about the company. He paused, withholding what he had fully uncovered. The sensitive financial evidence he chose to keep until the right moment, before the entire board of directors. Olivia, James placed his hand on the folder, his voice steady and low. I need you to stand with me. You are the only one who can show Hansol that global trust still has truth and honor left. Olivia looked down at the papers, her hands trembling but her eyes brightening. The pain of being disgraced was still there, but within her chest, a new strength was rising. In the small apartment, under the yellow glow of the lamp, James gave a faint nod. He knew the greatest battle was still ahead. That afternoon, the 45th floor of Global Trust was lit, though the Manhattan sky had already turned purple. Inside the vast boardroom, the air was so heavy that everyone felt short of breath. The powerful faces of Wall Street filled the long walnut table, each with a thick folder before them. Olivia sat quietly in the last row. The dress hastily borrowed from the receptionist was now wrinkled, and her hands were clasped tightly together. A few whispers rippled through the room, unhidden. "Isn't that the janitor? My God!" They even let her attend a board meeting. She lowered her head, avoiding the piercing stares, her heart pounding wildly. Board Chairman Robert Sterling tapped the wooden gavel lightly against the table. His voice resounded deep and firm. "We are here today to uncover the truth. Global Trust cannot live under a shadow of suspicion any longer." All eyes immediately turned to James Whitaker. He stood, slowly opened his worn leather briefcase, and drew out a stack of papers. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight. "This is a copy of the anonymous email received by Hansel. It accused Olivia Johnson, introduced as our Asian client relations specialist, of, in fact, being only a janitor at Global Trust. Our IT department traced the IP address that sent this email. It did not come from outside, but from within our own company network, and the specific source was the personal computer of Assistant Madison Clark. And this," he turned another set of papers, "is the draft contract Madison Clark pushed to sign, containing numerous unfavorable clauses, nearly a financial trap." He looked up, sweeping his gaze across the table. "Ladies and gentlemen, this was not a careless mistake. This was a deliberate scheme." The room erupted in murmurs. Some members nodded, but others frowned, doubtful. Olivia drew a deep breath, rising from the back row. Her voice trembled, yet rang clear. "I never intended to deceive. That day, when the interpreter was absent, I only wanted to save the company in a desperate moment. If that action was wrong, I will bear responsibility. But please believe me, I never meant to harm Global Trust." A brief silence fell. Then a sharp laugh cut through the air. Madison Clark leapt up, her face flushed, eyes blazing. "Lies, all lies. You are being led by a janitor. She's nothing but a power-hungry girl, trying to force her way into a place she does not belong." A few board members tilted their heads, exchanging glances, clearly still wavering. One murmured, "Janitor, specialist, hard to trust." The atmosphere coiled tighter, like a wire about to snap. Then, a hoarse voice rang out, cutting through the noise. "James." The man at the end of the table lifted his silver-rimmed glasses, his voice slow but heavy with authority. "You are being far too biased." The whole room turned at once. It was Harold Bennett, a board member with only a small shareholding, but notorious for constant discontent with leadership. He leaned back in his chair, eyes half smiling, half challenging. "Clark may be hot-tempered," Harold continued, "but she is capable. An anonymous email, a few contract clauses. Anyone could fabricate that. You intend to condemn a loyal assistant based on scraps of paper. I do not believe Clark alone would dare to go against this entire company." A new wave of whispers swept across the room. A few members, already doubtful of Olivia, nodded in agreement, finding his reasoning plausible. Olivia trembled slightly, her eyes meeting Harold's. In that instant, she read the familiarity in the way he looked at Madison. Too close, too trusting. A spark lit in her mind. Could it be they shared a secret connection? James narrowed his gaze, his cold eyes fixed on Harold. He understood immediately. This was no longer a simple standoff between Olivia and Madison. Behind Clark stood another force. The boardroom roared, splitting into two sides. One demanded immediate judgment of Madison. The other insisted on more evidence. The air was stretched to the breaking point, like a storm about to strike. James tightened his grip on the folder in his hand. He knew the decisive blow had not yet been delivered, and once it came to light, there would be no room left for denial. He leaned slightly toward the large screen at the end of the room, pressing a button on the small remote. The boardroom dimmed in a bluish glow as the security footage appeared. On screen, Madison Clark strode quickly into her private office, glancing around as if afraid of being followed. She handed a small silver USB drive to her assistant. The timestamp in the corner matched the moment just before the anonymous email was sent to Hansel. "No way," a board member whispered, eyes glued to the screen. James remained calm, but his eyes gleamed. "This is our internal security camera. It cannot be denied." He placed another stack of papers on the table, the fresh ink still sharp. "And this is proof of direct transfers from the shell company named in that draft contract." The funds flowed straight into Madison Clark's account, multiple times, over the past 6 months. A deadly silence consumed the room. Faces once doubtful now hardened, no one able to speak. Finally, Chairman Sterling struck the gavel against the table, his voice cold as steel. "Madison Clark, the board has decided you are terminated immediately. All files will be handed over to federal investigators." The door swung open, and 2 security officers stepped inside. They walked to Madison, gesturing for her to leave. Her face drained white, her eyes frantic. She looked around for help, but met only disdain. The room seemed to settle, everyone believing the play had ended. But then Madison suddenly turned toward Harold Bennett. Her voice rasped, trembling yet desperate. "You promised to protect me. You said we were in this together." A long silence followed. All eyes locked onto Harold. He raised his brows, lips curling into a cold smile, brushing away all ties. "Do not drag me into this. This is your doing. Face it yourself." The words struck Madison like a blade. Her eyes welled, then burned red with rage. She screamed, her voice a mix of sobs and wild laughter, echoing through the chamber. "Liar, you are the one who lured me in. You promised to shield me, to lift me higher. I was nothing but a puppet for you to manipulate. Stop pretending you are clean. Harold, you are the true accomplice." The boardroom exploded in uproar. Faces whipped toward Harold, stunned and furious. James seized the moment. He rose, calmly placing another folder on the table. "This is an internal memo signed with Harold Bennett's approval. He personally authorized the unfavorable clauses in the shell contract. Clark's confession only confirms the truth." A director who had stayed silent all along slammed the table, voice shaking with fury. "You have sold out Global Trust for greed and lust." Harold struggled, stammering denials, but his wild eyes betrayed him. He collapsed into his chair, cornered with no escape. Chairman Sterling struck the gavel again, his voice resolute. "Harold Bennett, by vote of the board, you are suspended immediately, stripped of all voting rights. Your case will be sent to investigators along with Madison Clark." The air in the boardroom was heavy, yet forged with steel determination. Then the chairman turned to Olivia. His voice softened, solemn yet sincere. "Miss Johnson, you have shown us courage, honesty, and devotion to Global Trust. We owe you a profound apology." Olivia stood in silence, her eyes brimming with tears. In that moment, she felt the light of justice break through, erasing the prejudice and wounds she had borne for so long. Once again, the 45th floor boardroom was lit, but this time, there was no heavy atmosphere like the day before. Instead, there was a sense of relief, as if a storm had passed and left behind a clear blue sky. CEO Richard Campbell rose before the entire board, his voice deeper, more sincere than ever. He turned to Olivia, his eyes no longer doubtful, only remorseful. "Olivia Johnson, I was wrong not to believe you. I let prejudice cloud my judgment. On behalf of Global Trust, I offer you a public apology." Olivia bowed her head slightly, her eyes brimming with tears. She had never imagined that one day, the head of the company would admit his mistake in front of everyone. Yet this public acknowledgement was the justice that she and her family deserved. Immediately after, Olivia sat down to write a handwritten letter to Hansel Group. Her strokes were steady, each word filled with honesty. An apology for the incident, a clear explanation about those who had been removed, and a pledge that Global Trust was now more transparent than ever. A week later, Hansel responded. Mr. Park Ji-hoon, the delegation head, expressed gratitude for Global Trust's spirit of transparency. "We believe a true partner does not make mistakes, but one who knows how to correct them once exposed." He wrote. Hansel agreed to return to the negotiating table. The signing day arrived. The room that day buzzed like a festival. Pens slid across paper. The signatures of Hansel and Global Trust side by side under the dazzling lights. A deal once thought lost had become a living testament to resilience and transparency. The reputation of Global Trust was not only preserved, but the press hailed it as the company brave enough to cleanse itself. Olivia stood nearby, her hands trembling slightly. From being a janitor looked down upon, she now witnessed the company she helped save step into a new chapter. Soon after, the board announced its decision. Olivia Johnson was appointed Director of Multicultural and External Relations. Applause thundered across the room. Olivia stepped forward to receive the decision, her heart racing, but her eyes shone brighter than ever. With her new salary, she could support her younger brother to continue college without night shifts. Her mother was transferred to the best hospital in Manhattan, with top medical staff and modern equipment. For the first time in years, Olivia felt the weight lift from her shoulders. Not stopping there, Olivia devoted her first bonus to founding the Second Chance Scholarship for women of color who had been forced to abandon their studies but still longed to return to the classroom. "I was once one of them," Olivia said at the launch ceremony, "and no one deserves to have their dreams crushed for a lifetime by prejudice." Olivia stood on stage, presenting the very first scholarship. The spotlight shone down on her radiant face. Behind her, Global Trust's new logo appeared with a simple yet powerful slogan, "Integrity First." The entire hall rose in applause, not only for Olivia, but for what she represented: dignity, resilience, and the strength to transform a system once thought unshakable.